There is, of course, another Canadian connection to that Millennium bomb plot. He's Ahmed Ressam, the man who was caught trying to smuggle a carload of explosives into the U.S. from British Columbia. Earlier tonight, we broadcast a Terence McKenna investigative documentary that revealed the full Ressam story. A case study which, as Paul Hunter reports, has led to some very embarrassing questions for the Chrétien government.
It's perhaps Canada's most infamous passport, Ahmed Ressam's, handed out on false information and a borrowed name, used in a botched attack on the United States on the Canada's most infamous passport, Ahmed Ressam's, handed out on false information and a borrowed name, used in a botched attack on the United States on the eve of the Millennium.
CBC News special report.
Tonight, a CBC investigative documentary for the first time told the whole story behind Ressam and its disturbing implications for Canada. Ressam came to this country as an accused Algerian terrorist in 1994. Once on the ground, he denied the accusations, claimed refugee status, and was allowed in. The documentary used actors reciting testimony by Ressam from later court appearances.
They kept me at their center there, and then they let me go.
On November 30th, 1999, Jordanian intelligence intercepted a telephone call between Abu Zubaydah, a longtime ally of bin Laden, and Qadir Abu Hoshar, a Palestinian extremist. Zubaydah said, "The time for training is over." Suspecting that this was a signal for Abu Hoshar to commence a terrorist operation, Jordanian police arrested Abu Hoshar and 15 others and informed Washington. One of the 16, Riyad Hijazi, had been born in California to Palestinian parents. After spending his childhood in the Middle East, he had returned to Northern California, taken refuge in extremist Islamist beliefs, and then made his way to Abu Zubaydah's Khalden training camp in Afghanistan, where he learned the fundamentals of guerrilla warfare. He and his younger brother had been recruited by Abu Hoshar into a loosely knit plot to attack Jewish and American targets in Jordan. After late 1996, when Abu Hoshar was arrested and jailed, Hijazi moved back to the United States, worked as a cab driver in Boston, and sent money back to his fellow plotters. After Abu Hoshar's release, Hijazi shuttled between Boston and Jordan, gathering money and supplies. With Abu Hoshar, he recruited in Turkey and Syria, as well as Jordan. With Abu Zubaydah's assistance, Abu Hoshar sent these recruits to Afghanistan for training. In late 1998, Hijazi and Abu Hoshar had settled on a plan. They would first attack 4 targets: the SAS Radisson Hotel in downtown Amman, Jordan, the border crossings from Jordan into Israel, and 2 Christian holy sites at a time when all these locations were likely to be thronged with American and other tourists. Next, they would target a local airport and other religious and cultural sites. Hijazi and Abu Hoshar cased the intended targets and sent back reports to Abu Zubaydah, who approved their plan. Finally, back in Amman from Boston, Hijazi gradually accumulated bomb-making materials, including sulfuric acid and 5,200 pounds of nitric acid, which were then stored in an enormous sub-basement dug by the plotters over a period of 2 months underneath a rented house. In early 1999, Hijazi and Abu Hoshar contacted Khalil Deek, an American citizen and an associate of Abu Zubaydah, who lived in Peshawar, Pakistan, and who, with Afghan-based extremists, had created an electronic version of a terrorist manual called the Encyclopedia of Jihad. They obtained a CD-ROM of this encyclopedia from Deek. In June, with help from Deek, Abu Hoshar arranged with Abu Zubaydah for Hijazi and 3 others to go to Afghanistan for added training in handling explosives. In late November 1999, Hijazi reportedly swore Before Abu Zubaydah, the bayat, loyalty to Osama bin Laden, committing himself to anything bin Laden ordered. He then departed for Jordan and was at a wayward point in Syria when Abu Zubaydah sent Abu Hoshar the message that prompted Jordanian authorities to roll up the whole cell. After the arrest of Abu Hoshar and 15 others, the Jordanians tracked Deek to Peshawar, persuaded Pakistan to extradite him, and added him to their catch. Searches in Amman found the rented house and, among other things, 71 drums of acids, several forged Saudi passports, detonators, and Khalil Deek's encyclopedia. 6 of the accomplices were sentenced to death. In custody, Hijazi's younger brother said that the group's motto had been, quote, "The season is coming and bodies will pile up in sacks," end quote. On December 4th, 1999, as news came in about the discoveries in Jordan, National Security Council counterterrorism coordinator Richard Clarke wrote Sandy Berger, "If George Tenet's story about a planned series of bin Laden attacks at the Millennium is true, we will need to make some decisions now." He told us he held several conversations with President Clinton during the crisis. He suggested threatening reprisals against the Taliban in Afghanistan in the event of any attacks on U.S. interests anywhere by bin Laden. He further proposed to Sandy Berger that a strike he made during the last week of '99 against al-Qaeda camps in Afghanistan, a proposal not adopted. Warned by the CIA that the disrupted Jordanian plot was probably part of a larger series of attacks intended for the Millennium, some possibly involving chemical weapons, the Principals Committee met on the night of December 8th and decided to task Richard Clarke's counterterrorism security group to develop plans to deter and disrupt al-Qaeda's plots. Michael Sheehan, the State Department member of the counterterrorism security group, communicated warnings to the Taliban that they would be held responsible for future al-Qaeda attacks. Mike was not diplomatic, Clarke reported to Berger. With virtually no evidence of a Taliban response, a new approach was made to Pakistan. General Anthony Zinni, the commander of Central Command, also known as CENTCOM, was designated as the president's special envoy and sent to ask General Musharraf to take whatever action you deem necessary to resolve the bin Laden problem at the earliest possible time. But Zinni came back empty-handed. As Ambassador William Milan reported from Islamabad, Musharraf was willing to take the political heat at home. The CIA worked hard with foreign security services to detain or at least keep an eye on suspected bin Laden associates. George Tenet, the director of the CIA, spoke to 20 of its foreign counterparts. Disruption and arrest operations were mounted against terrorists in 8 countries. In mid-December, President Clinton signed a memorandum of notification giving the CIA broader authority to use foreign proxies to detain bin Laden lieutenants without ever having to transfer them to U.S. custody. The authority was to capture, not kill, through lethal force might be used if necessary. Tenet would later send a message to all CIA personnel overseas saying, quote, "The threat could not be more real. Do whatever is necessary to disrupt bin Laden's plans. The American people are counting on you and me to take every appropriate step to protect them during this period," end quote. The State Department issued a worldwide threat advisory to its posts overseas. Then, on December 14th, an Algerian jihadist was caught bringing a load of explosives into the United States. Ahmed Ressam, age 23, had illegally immigrated to Canada in 1994. Using a falsified passport and a bogus story about persecution in Algeria, Ressam entered Montreal and claimed political asylum. For the next few years, he supported himself with petty crime. Recruited by an alumnus of Abu Zubaydah's Khalden camp, Ressam trained in Afghanistan in 1998, learning, among other things, how to place cyanide near the air intake of a building to achieve maximum lethality at minimum personal risk. Having joined other Algerians in planning a possible attack on a U.S. airport or consulate, Ressam left Afghanistan in early 1999, carrying precursor chemicals for explosives disguised in toiletry bottles, a notebook containing bomb assembly instructions, and $12,000. Back in Canada, he went about procuring weapons, chemicals, and false papers. In early summer 1999, having learned that not all of his colleagues could get the travel documents to enter Canada, Ressam decided to carry out the plan alone. By the end of the summer, he had chosen 3 Los Angeles area airports as potential targets, ultimately fixing on Los Angeles International Airport, also known as LAX, as the largest and easiest to operate in surreptitiously. He brought or stole chemical and bought equipment for the bomb, obtaining advice from 3 Algerian friends, all of whom were wanted by authorities in France for their roles in past terrorist attacks. Ressam also acquired new Confederates. He promised to help a New York-based partner, Abdelghani Meskini, get training in Afghanistan if Meskini would help him maneuver inside the United States. In December 1999, Ressam began his final preparations. He called an Afghanistan-based facilitator to inquire into whether bin Laden wanted to take credit for the attack, but he did not get a reply. He spent a week in Vancouver preparing the explosive components with a close friend. The chemicals were so caustic that the men kept their windows open despite the freezing temperatures outside and sucked on cough drops to soothe their irritated throats. While in Vancouver, Ressam also rented a Chrysler sedan for his travel into the United States and packed all the explosives into the truck's spare tire well. On December 14, 1999, Ressam drove his rental car into the ferry from Victoria, Canada, to Port Angeles, Washington. Ressam planned to drive to Seattle and meet Meskini, with whom he would travel to Los Angeles and case LAX. They planned to detonate the bomb on or around January 1st, 2000. At the Immigration and Naturalization Service pre-inspection station in Victoria, Ressam presented officials with his genuine but fraudulently obtained Canadian passport, from which he had torn the Afghanistan entry and exit stamps. The INS agent on duty ran the passport through a variety of databases, but since it was not in Ressam's name, he did not pick up the pending Canadian arrest warrants. After a cursory examination of Ressam's car, the INS agents allowed Ressam to board the ferry. Late in the afternoon of December 14th, Ressam arrived in Port Angeles. He waited for the other cars to depart the ferry, assuming, incorrectly, that the last car off would draw less scrutiny. Customs agents assigned to the port, noticing Ressam's nervousness, referred him to secondary inspection. When asked for additional identification, Ressam handed the customs agent a Price Costco membership card in the same false name as his passport. As that agent began an initial pat-down, Ressam panicked and tried to flee. Inspectors examining Ressam's rental car found the explosives concealed in the spare tire well. But at first, they assumed the white powder and viscous liquids were drug-related, until an inspector pried apart and identified one of the 4 timing devices concealed within black boxes. Ressam was placed under arrest. Investigators guessed his target was in Seattle. They did not learn about the Los Angeles airport planning until they re-examined evidence seized in Montreal in 2000. They obtained further details when Ressam began cooperating in May of 2001. After the disruption of the plot in Amman it had not escaped notice in Washington that Hijazi had lived in California and had driven a cab in Boston, and that Khalil Deek was a naturalized U.S. citizen who, as Sandy Berger reminded President Clinton, had been in touch with extremists in the United States as well as abroad. Before Ressam's arrest, Berger saw no need to raise a public alarm at home, although the FBI put all field offices on alert. Now, following Ressam's arrest, the FBI asked for an unprecedented number of special wiretaps. Both Sandy Berger and George Tenet told the commission that their impression was that more Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA, wiretap requests were proceeded during the Millennium Alert than ever before. The next day, writing about Ressam's arrests and links to a cell in Montreal, Berger informed the president that the FBI would advise police in the United States to step up activities, but would still try to avoid undue public alarm by stressing that the government had no specific information about planned attacks. At a December 22nd meeting of the small groups of principals, FBI Director Louis Freeh briefed officials for the National Security Council staff, CIA, and Department of Justice on wiretaps and investigations inside the United States, including a Brooklyn entity tied to the Ressam arrest, a seemingly unreliable foreign report of possible attacks on 7 U.S. cities, 2 Algerians detained on the Canadian border, and searches in Montreal related to a jihadist cell. The Justice Department released a statement on the alert the same day. Richard Clarke's staff warned foreign terrorist sleeper cells are present in the United States and attacks in the U.S. are likely. Clarke asked Sandy Berger to try to make sure that the domestic agencies remained on high alert. Is there a threat to civilian aircraft, he wrote? Clarke also asked the principals in late December to discuss a Foreign Security Service report about a bin Laden plan to put bomb on transatlantic flights. The Continuity Security Group met daily. Berger said that the principals met constantly. Later, when asked about what made her decide to ask Ressam to step out of his vehicle, Diana Dean, the customs inspector who referred Ressam to secondary inspection, testified that it was her training and experience. It appears that the heightened sense of alert at the national level played no role in Ressam's detention. There was a mounting sense of public alarm. The earlier Jordanian arrests have been covered in the press, and Ressam's arrest was featured on network evening news broadcasts throughout the Christmas season. The FBI was more communicative during the Millennium crisis than it had ever been. The senior FBI official for counterterrorism, Dale Watson, was a regular member of the Continuity Security Group, and Clarke had good relations both with him and with some of the FBI agents handling al-Qaeda relations investigations, including John O'Neill in New York. As a rule, however, neither Dale Watson nor these agents brought much information to the group. The FBI simply did not produce the kind of intelligence reports that other agencies routinely wrote and disseminated. As law enforcement officers, Bureau agents tended to write up only witness interviews, and written case analysis usually occurred only in memoranda to supervisors requesting authority to initiate or expand an investigation. But during the Millennium Alert, with its direct links into the United States from Hijazi, Deek, and Ressam, FBI officials were briefing a person about ongoing investigations, not relying on the dissemination of written reports. Berger told us that it was hard for FBI officials to hold back information in front of a cabinet-ranked group. After the alert, according to Berger and members of the National Security Staff, the FBI returned to its normal practice of withholding written reports and saying very little about investigations or witness interviews, taking the position that any information relating to pending investigations might be presented to a grand jury and hence could not be disclosed under then prevailing federal law. The terrorist plots that were broken up at the end of 1999 display the variety of operations that might be attributed, however indirectly, to Al-Qaeda. The Jordanian cell was a loose affiliate. We at the Commission now know that it sought approval and training from Afghanistan, and at least one key member swore loyalty to bin Laden. But the cell's plans and preparations were autonomous. Ressam's ties to Al-Qaeda were even looser. Though he had been recruited, trained, and prepared in a network affiliated with the organization and its allies, Ressam's own plans were nonetheless essentially independent. Al-Qaeda and bin Laden himself did have at least one operation of their very own in mind for the Millennium period. In Chapter 5, we introduced an Al-Qaeda operative named Nashiri. Working with bin Laden, he was developing a plan to attack a ship near Yemen. On January 3rd, an attempt was made to attack a U.S. warship in Aden, the USS Sullivans. The attempt failed when the small boat, overloaded with explosives, sank. The operatives salvaged their equipment without the attempt becoming known, and they put off their plots for another day. Al-Qaeda's planes operation was also coming along. In January 2000, the United States caught a glimpse of its preparations. In late 1999, the National Security Agency, the NSA, analyzed communications associated with a suspected terrorist facility in the Middle East, indicating that several members of an operational cadre were planning to travel to Kuala Lumpur in early January 2000. Initially, only the first names of three were known: Nawaf, Salem, and Khalid. NSA analysts surmised correctly that Salem was Nawaf's younger brother, seeking links not only with Al-Qaeda, but specifically with the 1998 embassy bombings. A CIA desk officer guessed that something more nefarious was afoot. Though Nawaf's trail was temporarily lost, the CIA soon identified Khalid as Khalid al-Mihdhar. He was located leaving Yemen and tracked until he arrived in Kuala Lumpur on January 5, 2000. Other Arabs, unidentified at the time, were watched as they gathered with him in the Malaysian capital. On January 8th, the surveillance teams reported that three of the Arabs had suddenly left Kuala Lumpur on a short flight to Bangkok. They identified one as Khalid al-Mihdhar. They later learned that one of his companions was named al-Hazmi, although it was not yet known that he was Nawaf. The only identifier available for the third person was part of a name, Salhasi. In Bangkok, CIA officers received the information too late to track the three men as they came in, and the travelers disappeared into the streets of Bangkok. The Counter-Terrorist Center had briefed the CIA leadership on the gathering in Kuala Lumpur, and the information had been passed on to Sandy Berger and the National Security Council staff and to FBI Director Louis Freeh and others at the FBI, though the FBI noted that the CIA had the lead and would let the FBI know if a domestic angle arose. The head of the bin Laden unit kept providing updates, unaware, at first, even that the Arabs had left Kuala Lumpur, let alone that their trail had been lost in Bangkok. When this bad news arrived, the names were put on a Thai watch list so that Thai authorities could inform the United States if any of them departed from Thailand. Several weeks later, CIA officers in Kuala Lumpur prodded colleagues in Bangkok for additional information regarding the three travelers. In early March 2000, Bangkok reported that Nawaf al-Hazmi, now identified for the first time with his full name, had departed on January 15th on a United Airlines flight to Los Angeles. As for Khalid al-Mihdhar, There was no report of his departure, even though he had accompanied Nawaf al-Hazmi on the United flight to Los Angeles. No one outside of the Counter-Terror Center was told any of this. The CIA did not try to register Khalid al-Mihdhar or Nawaf al-Hazmi with the State Department's tip-off watch list, either in January, when word arrived of Khalid al-Mihdhar's visa, or in March, when word came that Nawaf al-Hazmi, too, had a U.S. visa and a ticket to Los Angeles. None of this information about Khalid al-Mihdhar's U.S. visa or Nawaf al-Hazmi's travel to the United States went to the FBI, and nothing more was done to track any of the three until January 2001, when the investigation of another bombing, that of the USS Cole, reignited interest in Khalid. We will return to that story in Chapter 8.